I've seen some entitled people in my day, but this HOA Karen actually had the balls to call the cops on me for not giving her free gas from my own pump. Picture this level of insanity. I'm minding my own business, filling up my truck, when Brenda Ashworth, think every nightmare neighbor rolled into one person, comes marching across my driveway like she's conducting a military inspection. This woman looks me straight in the eye and says, "Fill up my Range Rover, Marcus. As HOA president, I shouldn't have to pay for gas when residents have fuel available." When I said absolutely not, she whips out her phone and calls 911 like I just committed murder. "I need police assistance. This man is being hostile and threatening me." The smell of diesel mixed with pure desperation was thick in the air. Here's what made her 911 call the dumbest mistake of her entire life. She had absolutely no idea who she was really talking to. Where are you watching from? You're gonna love this. Let me introduce myself properly. The name's Marcus Kellerman, and I'm what you might call a guy who's seen some things. 52 years old, been through more career changes than most people have had jobs. Started in the military, logistics division, where I learned that preparation isn't just smart, it's survival. The metallic taste of MREs and diesel fumes became my daily routine for 20 years, moving supplies across 3 continents. That was before life threw me a curveball the size of a freight train. My wife Sarah battled cancer for 2 years. 2 long, expensive, soul-crushing years of treatments and hospital bills. When she passed last spring, I couldn't stay in our old house anymore. The creak of every floorboard held memories I wasn't ready to face. So I packed up, sold everything, and moved to Willowbrook Estates, a nice little subdivision where property was cheap and neighbors supposedly minded their own business. Or so I thought. Willowbrook's got about 200 homes, mostly decent folks who work honest jobs and want that suburban dream. Tree-lined streets, kids playing in yards, the whole Norman Rockwell fantasy. The HOA used to be run by a retired teacher named Mrs. Henderson, who kept things sensible. Mow your lawn, don't paint your house purple, pay your dues. Simple stuff that actually made sense. Then came Hurricane Brenda. Brenda Ashworth moved here from some ritzy gated community where the average house costs more than a NASA rocket. Real estate agent, drives a Range Rover that gleams like a diamond and has that particular brand of entitlement that comes from never hearing no in her entire privileged existence. Within 8 months, she'd somehow conned her way into the HOA presidency on a platform of elevating standards and removing undesirable elements. Translation: ethnic cleansing for suburbia. I started noticing her pattern real quick. Violation notices to the Rodriguez family for excessive vehicle parking. They had 2 cars. Fines for old Mr. Orion's vegetable garden being inconsistent with neighborhood aesthetics. Harassment letters to the young black couple who dared to install a basketball hoop. Meanwhile, her white neighbors with identical setups. Radio silence. Now, about my fuel pump. When I bought my place, it came with a perfect garage and workshop space for restoring vintage trucks. The previous owner had been a farmer with proper agricultural permits for personal diesel storage. Completely legal, professionally installed, inspected annually by the fire marshal. The sweet smell of diesel mixed with motor oil became my therapy after losing Sarah. The pump setup is gorgeous. Professional-grade equipment, safety features that exceed code requirements, clear private property signage. Cost me 15 grand to update, but during the last power outage, I was the only guy with reliable fuel for generators. Helped 3 elderly neighbors keep their medical equipment running. That's when Brenda targeted me. She came clicking over one morning in those ridiculous designer heels. You could hear her approaching like a tap-dancing spider. Started interrogating me about zoning compliance and community resources like she was conducting a federal investigation. When I showed her the permits and agricultural exemption, her face went sour as expired milk. "Well," she sniffed, "we'll just see about that." Within a week, I got my first violation notice. $500 fine for unauthorized commercial activity. The letter was longer than my military discharge papers, and about as friendly as an IRS audit. Apparently, my fuel pump was creating unfair advantages and attracting undesirable traffic patterns. I spent 3 hours researching HOA covenants, printed documentation proving my pump was completely legal, and hand-delivered my response with a smile. Figured I'd educated her, case closed. That's when I learned something important about entitled people. They don't want to be right, they want to win. And Brenda had apparently decided that this blue-collar veteran with his industrial equipment was going to be her first scalp in the battle for Willowbrook's improved image. The acrid smell of her cheap perfume lingering in my driveway should have been my first warning. This woman was about to make my life very interesting. 3 days after I delivered my legal documentation, Brenda called an emergency HOA board meeting. Emergency. Like my fuel pump was about to explode and level half the county. The community center smelled like stale coffee and broken dreams, that distinctive mix of industrial carpet cleaner and decades of neighborhood drama. 30 confused neighbors sat in squeaky folding chairs under fluorescent lights that buzzed like dying insects. The metallic taste of tension filled the air. Brenda had prepared a PowerPoint presentation about my fuel pump, because apparently that's what passes for crisis management in suburbia these days. "Ladies and gentlemen," she announced, clicking her laser pointer like she was targeting enemy positions, "we have a serious safety hazard that requires immediate action." Up flashed a photo of my fuel pump with dramatic red arrows pointing at it like evidence from CSI. She'd even added scary captions in bold red text: "Explosion risk" and "Environmental hazard." The woman had clearly missed her calling in disaster movie marketing. "This unauthorized commercial installation poses significant risks to our families, our children, and our property values," she declared with the drama of someone announcing the apocalypse. I raised my hand politely. "Ma'am, I provided documentation proving the floor recognizes only board members during formal presentations." She cut me off with a smile that could freeze hell itself. Here's where it got interesting. Brenda had actually done her homework, sort of. She'd researched fire codes and zoning ordinances, even pulled up some obscure county regulations about fuel storage. The problem was, she'd completely missed the agricultural exemptions that made my setup bulletproof legal. Back in my military days, we had a saying about officers who'd read half the manual and thought they knew everything. They were the most dangerous people on base because they had just enough knowledge to be confidently wrong. She spent 15 minutes describing disaster scenarios straight from bad action movies. Explosions leveling city blocks. Environmental contamination turning Willowbrook into Chernobyl. Insurance companies fleeing in terror. Property values crashing harder than the stock market in 1929. The crowd was eating it up like free cake at a church social. Neighbors who'd waved at me for months suddenly looked at me like I was cooking meth in my garage. The nervous shuffle of people shifting in cheap plastic chairs filled the room. "Therefore," Brenda announced with prosecutorial satisfaction, "I motion for an immediate $1,000 fine and 48-hour removal deadline. All in favor?" 4 hands shot up faster than rockets at Cape Canaveral. That's when I stood up. My chair screeched against linoleum like nails on a chalkboard, cutting through the silence. "Before you vote," I said in that calm tone 20 years of military service develops, "might I suggest reviewing actual facts instead of Hollywood fiction?" I walked forward carrying a manila folder thick as a phone book. The room temperature seemed to drop as Brenda realized I'd come prepared for war. "First," I said, pulling out official documents, "here's last month's Fire Marshal Safety Inspection Report. Passed with flying colors. Marshal Henderson noted my installation exceeds current safety standards by a significant margin." Murmurs rippled through the crowd like waves in a disturbed pond. "Second, here's my agricultural exemption paperwork, properly filed with the county and renewed annually for 3 years, completely legal under state and federal law." The murmurs grew louder as reality penetrated the manufactured panic. "Third, confirmation from my insurance company, full coverage, complete liability protection. They actually reduced my premiums because of the advanced safety features." Then came the mini twist that changed everything. "Oh, and Fire Marshal Henderson, he's sitting right there in the 3rd row. Jim, why don't you tell folks about these safety hazards that have Brenda so concerned?" Fire Marshal Jim Henderson stood up grinning like he'd won the lottery. "Folks, I've inspected hundreds of fuel installations in 30 years. Marcus's setup is textbook perfect. Hell, it's safer than most commercial gas stations if I'm being honest." The room exploded. Neighbors demanded explanations. Board members shuffled papers nervously. Someone actually started applauding. Brenda's face cycled through more colors than a mood ring having a seizure. Her desperation mixed with overpriced perfume created a nauseating cocktail. "Well," she stammered, voice cracking, "safety isn't the only concern. Property values, aesthetics, traffic patterns." "Actually," interrupted Dorothy Martinez, sweet elderly neighbor from 2 streets over, "during last winter's power outage, Marcus kept my husband Harold's oxygen machine running all night. His fuel pump literally saved Harold's life." That opened the floodgates. The single mom who got emergency fuel during the ice storm. The veteran with backup power for medical equipment. The family whose generator prevented basement flooding. Story after story of my dangerous installation actually helping the community. Brenda called for immediate recess. The vote was postponed pending further investigation. As neighbors filed out, several apologized for believing the scare tactics. But I noticed Brenda hunched over her phone, typing with the fury of someone whose plan A just exploded in her face. The sharp clicking of her acrylic nails on the screen sounded like tiny hammers building something unpleasant. Round one was mine, but something told me Brenda Ashworth was just getting started. 2 weeks of blissful silence made me think maybe Brenda had finally gotten the message. Should have known better. You don't back down a woman who considers designer handbags a constitutional right without serious retaliation. I was in my garage Tuesday morning, elbow deep in rebuilding a carburetor for my '73 Chevy, when unfamiliar voices drifted in from my driveway. The sweet smell of motor oil and metal shavings couldn't mask my sudden unease. Through the window, I spotted a guy in a polo shirt and clipboard talking into a radio. Official looking. The kind of official that makes your stomach drop even when you've done nothing wrong. City zoning inspector. I wiped my hands on a shop rag. The rough terry cloth felt like sandpaper against my oil-stained fingers, and headed outside to face whatever fresh hell Brenda had unleashed. Mr. Kellerman? The inspector was maybe 30, earnest face, probably went into government work thinking he'd save the world. I'm Dave Morrison from City Planning. We received a complaint about unauthorized commercial activity at this address. Commercial activity? I kept my voice level, though my brain was racing through Brenda's latest creative fiction. Anonymous tip claimed you're operating an unlicensed fuel station, selling gasoline to residents. He glanced at his notes with the weariness of someone who'd investigated too many neighbor disputes. Complaint alleges multiple vehicles at all hours, environmental violations, possible tax evasion. The accusation was so ridiculous I almost laughed. Instead, I invited him to inspect everything, offered complete documentation, even gave him Marshall Henderson's direct number. The inspection took an hour, every safety protocol verified, every permit confirmed, every environmental standard exceeded by a country mile. Honestly, Mr. Kellerman, Dave said, closing his tablet with obvious relief, this is one of the most properly installed private fuel systems I've ever seen. Whoever filed this complaint either seriously misunderstood what they were seeing or they were lying through their teeth. I didn't say that, but his expression told the whole story. That's when Brenda made her grand entrance, timing worthy of a Broadway diva. She came clicking across the street in those ridiculous heels, waving a folder like it contained nuclear launch codes. The sharp staccato of designer shoes on asphalt announced her approach like a drum roll before disaster. Inspector Morrison? I'm Brenda Ashworth, HOA President. I hope you're taking this serious violation of our community standards appropriately. Dave shifted uncomfortably. Ma'am, I've completed my inspection. There are no violations here. The installation is completely legal and properly permitted under agricultural exemptions. Brenda's confident smile cracked like cheap paint in summer heat. But the environmental concerns? The safety hazards? The obvious commercial sales operation? No evidence of commercial activity whatsoever. No environmental violations detected. Safety standards actually exceed current requirements. Dave's voice carried that patient tone civil servants develop for dealing with difficult citizens. In fact, filing false reports with city offices wastes municipal resources and carries penalties under Code 847.3. Fines up to $5,000 for repeat offenders. I mentally filed that legal nugget away. Apparently making bogus complaints wasn't just annoying, it was expensive when you got caught. Brenda's face cycled through more colors than a sunset over a chemical plant. There must be some mistake. I have extensive documentation of multiple violations. Ma'am, Dave interrupted with diplomatic firmness. I'd be happy to review any legitimate evidence, but what I've observed today doesn't remotely match the filed complaint. After he left, Brenda stood in my driveway for a full minute, apparently processing that her master plan had exploded in her face. The acrid smell of her frustration mixed with overpriced department store perfume created an almost visible cloud of defeat. This isn't over, Marcus, she finally hissed, voice tight as piano wire. There are other ways to handle problem residents who refuse to cooperate. That evening, while researching municipal complaint procedures, always smart to understand the rules when someone's weaponizing them against you, my phone buzzed with a text from Jake, a contractor 3 houses down. Dude, check Nextdoor app. Someone's going nuclear on you. I rarely used social media, but Jake sent screenshots that made my blood pressure spike. Brenda had created an account called Concerned Willowbrook Resident and was conducting a full-scale character assassination. Posts about dangerous fuel storage, declining property values, and residents who ignore community safety. Most neighbors were defending me, sharing stories about emergency fuel during power outages. But several were buying Brenda's narrative, expressing worry about safety and home values. Then I noticed something that changed everything. 3 of the most vocal anti-Marcus accounts were created in the past week, with profile photos that screamed stock image. Someone was manufacturing neighborhood outrage with fake profiles. The mini twist hit like ice water in my veins. Brenda wasn't just targeting me anymore. She was trying to poison the entire community against me through digital manipulation and manufactured consensus. I screenshotted everything, documented the fake accounts, and started building a comprehensive file. If Brenda wanted digital warfare, she'd picked the wrong opponent. 20 years of military logistics teaches you to think several moves ahead and always have contingency plans. The metallic taste of anger mixed with cold anticipation. Brenda was getting desperate, making careless mistakes. And desperate people with secrets tend to reveal more than they ever intended. Time to go on offense. The next morning, I was enjoying my first cup of coffee. That perfect moment when the world's quiet except for birds chirping and the distant rumble of early commuters. When an unmarked sedan crept into my driveway like a hearse at a funeral. 2 people climbed out. A woman in a wrinkled business suit and a guy who screamed wannabe private investigator louder than a carnival barker. They didn't knock, didn't introduce themselves, just started prowling around my property with cameras and measuring tools like they were conducting a crime scene investigation. I stepped onto my porch, coffee mug warming my hands against the morning chill. "Morning, folks. Something I can help you with?" The woman glanced up from her tablet with all the warmth of a tax auditor. "Property assessment. Routine neighborhood evaluation for insurance compliance purposes." "Interesting," I said, taking a deliberate sip of coffee. Considering my insurance company didn't mention scheduling any assessment. "Mind showing me some official identification?" That's when things got spicy. Buzzcut stepped forward with the swagger of someone who'd watched too many cop shows. "Sir, we have legitimate business conducting this evaluation. I strongly suggest you return inside your residence." 20 years of dealing with military wannabes had fine-tuned my ability to spot fake authority from 50 yards away. All bark, zero actual bite. "I strongly suggest you remove yourselves from my private property before I contact actual law enforcement officials." They retreated, but not before Buzzcut snapped about 50 photos of my fuel pump from every conceivable angle. The whole encounter reeked of amateur hour. People pretending to possess authority they'd never legitimately earned. 2 hours later, my phone rang with an unknown number. Usually ignore those, but instinct made me answer. "Mr. Kellerman, this is Rick Santos from Apex Investigations. We need to discuss Brenda Ashworth immediately." My coffee suddenly tasted like pennies. "I'm listening." "She hired my firm to investigate you, specifically requested anything illegal, embarrassing, or compromising. Offered a $5,000 bonus for information that could result in your arrest or forced relocation." The sheer audacity took my breath away. "And you're sharing this information because when I conducted your standard background check, I discovered exactly who you are professionally." His voice carried genuine professional respect mixed with obvious embarrassment. "Mr. Kellerman, this woman hired me to dig up dirt on a police chief. Did she honestly think I wouldn't discover that crucial detail?" The mini twist hit like lightning splitting an oak tree. Brenda had been so obsessed with harassing some random blue-collar homeowner that she'd never bothered researching what I actually did for a living. She'd literally hired a private investigator to find criminal dirt on the guy who ran the local police department. "She has no idea about my profession?" I asked, though her cluelessness was becoming crystal clear. "Absolutely none. When I informed her you were law enforcement, she accused me of fabricating excuses and demanded I continue digging. That's when I decided this conversation was necessary." I thanked Rick for his professional integrity and hung up, mind spinning like a turbocharged engine. Brenda had just crossed into territory she didn't even know existed. Hiring investigators to harass law enforcement officers wasn't just monumentally stupid. Depending on interpretation, it could constitute intimidation of a police official, which carries felony-level consequences in most